Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Bill Gates said, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. Well, on today's episode, we talk about the future of leadership, leading from the heart, why mindfulness matters, and more. My guest is an author, keynote speaker, performance and leadership coach, and podcast host. He built a basketball training company out of his college apartment and for 15 years worked with some of basketball's elite NBA players such as MVP Steph Curry and All-Star Joel Embiid. Today, he helps individuals develop purpose-driven, mindfully aware, and heart-centered leadership skills. His list of clients include IBM, Lululemon, CISCO, Morgan Stanley, and many others. Please welcome the founder of MindShift Labs and the man who's helping us unlock the human potential we all have within, Mike Lee. Mike, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Jay, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to dive in with you today.
Absolutely, as am I. So let's jump right in. I would love it if we could go back in time a bit and share with us a bit about where your story begins, a bit about your backstory. And while you're doing that, Mike, can you maybe share with us some early experiences that you had that shaped the person who you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the journey really started, I was a sophomore in college. We had just finished the basketball season, and a friend of mine and I were discussing plans for the summer, and we decided, just for the fun of it, to put together a summer basketball camp in our hometown of Marshfield, Wisconsin. Now, Marshfield is a town of about 15,000 people in the middle of absolutely nowhere. As you think of the epitome of middle America, and that's where I grew up. We were, at that time before the highways were improved, we were probably 3.5 to 4 hours away from Milwaukee or Minneapolis. So those are the two big cities that we were in the middle of. And in order to really get good quality basketball instruction, you had to travel, and we wanted to offer something in our hometown. So we booked a gym. I designed a flyer in Microsoft Word and printed out the flyers on my mom's computer, and we took them all around town to get them out. We mailed them actually in the mail. We hand wrote the addresses for the basketball coaches in the area, put the stamps on, sent everything out. So we didn't really know what to expect. And the first year we had 100 kids show up. The second year we were at 200, and the third year we were at close to 300 kids in a town in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. And so at the time, I wanted to coach Division I college basketball. I was playing college basketball at a small Division III school, but my dream was to coach at the Division I level. And after we had this third year at camp, I decided to go in a different direction, and we built an AAU program, or a club basketball program, which is essentially a program for kids outside of their normal school opportunity in the off season, the spring and the summer, where you travel around and go to tournaments. Usually it's for kids who want to play at a high level. They're trying to play college basketball or beyond. And through that experience, I was able to work with some pretty high level players, and I realized that that's more so what I wanted to do. It wasn't booking hotel rooms and scheduling tournaments and dealing with parents and all these things, talk about playing time. And we let go of the club program and solely focused on training, and I picked up and I moved to Milwaukee, and we opened a training facility there, and I was able to work with a lot of kids that went on to play Division I college basketball, hit game-winning shots in the NCAA tournament. Guys have been drafted in the NBA draft, playing the NBA finals. And things were going really well. It was something that was created that was really beyond anything that I could have ever imagined when I was starting this out of my college apartment. But at the same time, the winters in Wisconsin left me really, really depressed. Anybody who's a listener that is from the Midwest, from the East Coast, that deals with the lack of sunlight in during the winters, it can take a toll on your mental health.
Absolutely.
I don't know the exact science behind it, but it has something to do with the lack of sunlight stimulating different areas of or not stimulating areas of your brain. There's also a component of it that deals with not getting enough vitamin D. And it was really bad. My barometer was if Kobe Bryant's agent called and said he was at your gym and wanted to get a workout in, and I didn't want to get out of bed, that meant I was in a state of depression. And so I decided to pick up and pack my stuff and move out to LA purely for the weather. I thought I was going to go out for the winters and come back in the summers to stay involved in our basketball business, stay more hands-on in the basketball business. And I got out there, and it was January, it was sunny out, and I was feeling amazing, way better than I'd ever felt before in the winter of my life. And I decided to get off this antidepressant medication that I'd been on at that point for about 14 years. And getting off of it was quite literally like getting off of heroin. That's what board certified doctors at UCLA have now. They've done research on it, and that's what they're comparing it to. And it threw my brain and my body into a state of chronic emotional instability. I would go from laughing to crying to crippling anxiety to debilitating depression, all within a span of a couple of hours. So as you can imagine, I was on this emotional roller coaster. And if I was on this emotional roller coaster, there was no way that I could be present. I couldn't be in the moment. And as you know, Jay, as somebody who's leading a business and leading other people, if we can't be in the present moment, we can't create our future. Everything that we want exists in the present moment. You talk about it from a performance standpoint. Being in the zone or getting to that state of flow where we do our best work exists in the present moment. From a leadership perspective, when we connect with people, when we show up in an empathetic way where they can feel our presence, that only exists in the present moment. And so I knew I needed a tool to help me win this battleground that had been created in my mind, because that's what I felt like every single day, that I was going to war in my mind. And at this point, I had been practicing yoga for about a year to just navigate the stress of running a business, along with we were building a nonprofit for inner city at-risk kids in Milwaukee, and just had a lot on my plate, and I needed something more than exercise. And so I was familiar with yoga and decided to commit to a daily mindfulness meditation practice to move through this period of adversity while I was going through the withdrawal symptoms of getting off this medication. And after a couple months of consistent practice, I realized why elite athletes like Kobe, why visionary CEOs like Steve Jobs and luminaries like Oprah all attributed a meditation practice, a form of a meditation practice, to the level of success. And I can get into all the science behind it and everything, but if you want, but the equivalent is really, meditation is to your brain what exercise is to your body. There are areas of your brain that are associated with things like focus, self-awareness, our decision-making, that actually grow and they get bigger in our brain. And so there's physical change that happens, real evidence of change. And at that point, I realized that my life was probably going to take a different path. And instead of building basketball players, it was going to be building leaders and building people.
Very interesting. So there's a few things that I want to continue to explore. So let's back up for just a moment. And thank you for sharing this part of the story, because obviously it's very foundational to what transpires for you next and how you're building the business that you are today and doing the work that you're doing today. So first, if we go back a bit, so you were on this antidepressant for 14 years. Now, was it all related to the lack of sunlight, being in that area of Wisconsin? Were there some other challenges that you were facing with anxiety and depression that weren't related to that? So that's one question. So let's explore that for just a moment.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I don't think anybody's ever asked me that on a show when I share that story. And the answer is, yeah, it was. I think, first of all, just to clarify, like, I don't want anybody to leave this session or leave our show and take any of this as medical advice. Like, this is just a personal decision that I made that was right for me at this stage of my life. And to be honest with you, for a while, nobody ever in any place in the world should ever take any of this stuff ever in their life, because it was hell getting off of it. But I've reached a point where I have enough awareness around, there's a time and place for it if you're going to do the work along with it. But if you're going to do it to numb out and to escape your life, you might want to rethink your approach to it. But to answer your question, was there other stuff going on? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. And I think I had to get out to really see that. I had to, because at the time I attributed 95% of it to the lack of sunlight, because it just was. It was, that's when it would, I think it's because that's when it would be the worst. It's not necessarily when it wasn't necessarily the trigger for it, maybe, but it just exasperated it, right? So I don't know if that makes sense at all. But I mean, there were definitely one of the, yeah, go ahead.
That does make a lot of sense, and I appreciate you clarifying that. And we can explore that a bit more deeply. I did want to ask you if, in addition to medication, were you also working with a therapist? Were you doing, like you mentioned, we have to do the work in addition to, so were you actually doing work to explore what are those challenges that I'm dealing with? What are those wounds that can discover so I can get to the root cause and actually work through those challenges?
Yeah, the answer is no, I wasn't. It was go to the psychiatrist, take this, and this will help you feel better, which is a broken approach. I think I want to go back and I want to answer probably the second part of or give the answer to your question. The second part of the answer to your first question, and that some of the things that I was dealing with that didn't have to do with lack of sunlight. And I think this is something that probably a majority of your listeners, especially small business owners, entrepreneurs, can relate to at a certain level. And that was a big thing, was that I attached my self-worth to how my business was doing. I attached my self-worth to what level of players I was working out. I attached my self-worth to so many things that were external, right? And I finally had a realization when I moved to LA, was that I had, that when I first started my business, my basketball business, it was, I have to work out, my mindset was, I got to work out college basketball players. Then it was, I have to work out Division I college basketball players. Then it was, I got to work out overseas pros. Then it was, I got to work out NBA players. And I got to the point where I did all that. And then it was just like, it was the D1 players, the NBA All-Stars, even Olympic athletes, right? Like, you can't really go any higher than that. And so, but at the same time, it's you reach these accomplishments and you realize that I'm not actually chasing the accomplishment. I'm not chasing the next $1 million in my business. I'm not actually chasing landing this next client. What I'm actually chasing is the feeling that I will get when I achieve those things, right? Our whole life is determined by the quality of our feelings, not by the things that we actually experience. It's the feelings within the experience. And a lot of times, those feelings are available to us right now in this moment. And it's all just depends on what we decide to focus on, right? So that was a big thing that I learned. And I learned that I had to place my identity in something that was not going to shift and change. And go ahead.
So this is a very interesting conversation to explore, and it is an important one. And you just gave a great example of what can happen when we're attaching identity, self-worth to those things that are external, attaching our self-worth to results as opposed to the work that we put in, as opposed to the things that we actually can control. And so as you were describing this and working with these high performers, and you kept continuing to elevate to go after a higher level, right? So you're working with NBA players, you're working with Olympic athletes. But at the end of the day, did you not feel fulfilled? And what was driving you to say, I need more, I need more?
Well, I think in a simplified way, it's there's a void within us that we're trying to fill by all these external things. And I think we all have our own journey and process as to how we navigate that part of our lives. And I do think that there's value in, I guess I should backtrack a little bit. And I think one of the biggest things is you have to have some sort of framework as to how you view the world. What is your blueprint of the world? And what is the purpose of the world at a macro level? Not what is your purpose in the world. That's a totally different conversation. But what is the purpose of the world? Like, what is the purpose of your existence, right? And what I think really shifted for me was when I stopped looking at the world as a place, and this has been recent. This is not things that I learned, when I was getting off medication. I mean, definitely ignited some of these thoughts and put me in some of the situations that I was in where I really had to go into these thoughts and explore some of these things. But to stop looking at the world as a place where it's a place for you to accomplish things, to build businesses, find the relationship, get that next house, whatever it is, and thinking that it's a space for that. And I shifted it from a place where I can get something to a place where I can learn. And started looking at it through the lens of, this is a classroom. I've never said this before ever, and I think this is a good analogy. It's looking at the world through the lens of it as if it's a classroom, not going to a shopping center or going to a mall. Like, I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but because then I think it always puts you in a growth mindset, right? And when we're in a growth mindset, we're in the present moment. And when we're in that present, and the feelings that we experience in that moment are what create the experience that we have of life. And so I think the first thing is decide how you're going to view the world at a macro level. I think that's a really, really important thing that I wish I would have done earlier.
Yeah, that's a very powerful point.
So just to clarify though, like, I'm not saying don't have big dreams, don't have goals, don't go after things, but it's your perspective as to how you navigate that journey. And I think we are drawn to certain things. We are drawn to a certain interest. Maybe it's a sport, maybe it's an area of business, maybe it's a type of business that we want to create, right? I think we are all at a very high level. We are drawn to those things because that is going to put us on a path where we are going to learn the lessons that we're supposed to learn this time around. Right? So I think pay attention to those things and go after those things. I am in no way, shape, or form have my ambitions dropped or I become complacent because of holding this belief. Everything is still the same. It's just my experience within the journey is completely different.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think also the clarity around why is this important to me? So understanding what is the meaning that I'm attaching to that goal, and how does that change who I am? How does that bring certain learnings and experience to me? And what does that actually mean for me and for those that I'm serving? So I think getting the clarity around that and the understanding of why that goal, that objective, whatever it is that you're moving toward, why is that so important to you? So speak
100%.
speak to the mindfulness piece. So were you doing guided meditation? What was the first type of mindfulness that you moved into? You talked about yoga, but now let's talk about the meditation aspect.
Yeah, so I think it really, for a lot of people, yoga is a bridge to meditation, because if you have, 95% of yoga classes, I call them fitness yoga. They're not really about the practice of yoga. It's fitness disguised as yoga. But there's 8 limbs of yoga, 8 pillars of yoga, and the physical practice is only one of them. Another one of them is concentration, and that's where the mindfulness aspect comes in. But my point with saying that is, I think if you find a really good teacher, yoga is a great entry place for mindfulness, because the truth is most of us are much more comfortable dealing with physical exercise in our bodies than we are with dealing with what's going on in our minds. So I think the yoga with the right teacher is a great entryway. But from a specific meditation practice, I started out with a mindfulness meditation practice. I had to have been one of the first users of Headspace, which is super popular now. I think I first started using it. I was using it off and on before I really committed to it, but I was using it as a reaction to something, an event, a stressful event. It was something would happen, and then I would go meditate. Right? I was what we call a crisis meditator. Right? We meditate in response to something that is going on. But the truth is, the most powerful way to practice it is to use it to set up your emotional state, set up your mental state, so that you carry that sense of calm, sense of groundedness, a sense of presence with you throughout the day. And then when those things show up, you can attack them with more awareness, with more presence, with more focus, and all the host of all the other things that go along with having a mindfulness practice. So it started with that. It started with the mindfulness meditation practice, and it was not an hour a day. It was not 45 minutes a day. It was not me going to India and staying in an ashram for 6 months. It was 5 minutes a day sitting on my balcony. And then it was 10 minutes a day. And then it grew from there. And I think the big thing is really to start small with it. But Headspace and mindfulness practice is where it started.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. So in my mastermind classes, I will provide a subscription to Headspace to the mastermind members, because it is such a game changer. It's made such a big difference for me. Now, I don't know what your experience is. I'd love to hear what it was like for you when you first started. It was very, very difficult for me to sit there for even just mere minutes, not 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes or longer, but I mean for 2 or 3 minutes, And just to recognize and pay attention to my thoughts, it was just very, very challenging. But Headspace does such a fantastic job of the guided meditations and really helping you with that process. And of course, Headspace isn't the only option available, but it is an excellent one. So what was the experience like for you when you first started? Did you find it challenging, or was it something that you were able to dive right into and really start to develop those muscles?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like when I first started, I had an easier time with it. But when I fully got off of the antidepressant that I was on, and I had no serotonin in my body, it was insanely difficult to sit and to practice. Insanely difficult. And I think, that's an important point that you bring up, is that I think meditation gets branded almost in the same category as relaxation. And the truth is that relaxation might be a byproduct of a meditation practice, but it's not the goal. The goal of a meditation practice is simply training your mind. It's mental conditioning. Just like an athlete goes to the gym to do their squats and their mobility exercises and work on their lateral movement, you're doing the same thing with a meditation practice. And I think when you approach it as, this is an exercise to train my mind, not this is 10 minutes so that I can relax, it will change how you approach the practice, and you'll probably be able to show up with a little more patience for yourself, a little more grace with yourself when you start a practice, and quite frankly, 10 years into the practice.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way of articulating it. And keep in mind, and you've used this word, I use this word, it is a practice. So there's no perfection here, right? It is something that we practice on a regular basis. And I can share with you and share with our audience that one of the greatest aspects of my meditation practice, where it's really helped me, is to be able to create just a little bit of space between something that would normally pull me in to react to a situation, and allows me just that little bit of space to think about it, to pause, to breathe, and then be able to respond logically without so much emotion tied to it. What about you?
Yeah, I found the same thing. I call this the decision gap. And it's exactly what you're talking about. That space between what happens and our response to what happens. And when we have a mindfulness practice, it allows us to tap into the decision gap, because it lots of times when adversity hits, we become the emotions, we become the storm when something big happens, right? And with the decision gap, we can, number one, we create awareness. Number two, we can get objective, right? And now instead of, let me back up, and I'll break down the three parts of how we teach it. It's number one, we get the awareness. The awareness, is so huge. We talk about it all the time, but I think there's a study that says, it was in HBR or Forbes or something, that said 85% of executives think that they're self-aware, but the study reveals that only 15 of them actually are. So we all think that we're self-aware, but the truth is, we're really not. And so the first key is the awareness aspect, right? We have to become aware of what we are, what's triggering us, what we're feeling in our body, right? And so the first step is creating the awareness. The second part is to detach emotionally, right? We detach emotionally from that trigger, that stressor, whatever it is that just showed up, the lost business deal, the comment that somebody made, whatever it is, we detach emotionally from it. And the third part is, now we're objective. And from the objective place, instead of becoming that storm, right, that I talked about, we are the observer of the storm. And when we're the observer of the storm, when we're in the seat of awareness, that's when we can operate in ways that are in alignment with our vision, with our values, and how we want to show up and how we want to lead. And so just that one aspect, I mean, there's hundreds of other benefits of having a mindfulness practice, but a very practical one from a leadership perspective, from a parenting perspective, right, is just to be able to tap into the power of the decision gap.
Yeah, I love that. So awareness, detach emotionally, and then become the observer, the objectivity side of this. So as part of the work that you do with high performers and leaders and organizations, this becomes an aspect of the leadership coaching and training, the skills that you're helping them develop. And what kind of feedback do you get from some of the clients that you're working with? So as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, some of the clients that you're working with. So what do you hear back from them as they are starting to put these practices into place and they're working on themselves and they're doing these types of meditation practices? How is it helping them become better leaders or better connect with their team members, show more empathy, listen more intently? What are the things that you're hearing from them, the feedback specifically?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that you just mentioned, I think, some of it's all over the place, from this has made me a better parent to I'm able to connect with my people better. I'm not responding as much or not reacting as much as I used to, and I'm able to approach things in a more thoughtful way. A lot of the things that you brought up are really what we're hearing. I think it also allows people to be more present in high pressure situations. I think one aspect of, and I didn't say this, a friend of mine who is a performance psychologist, he works with a lot of NBA guys, he said this. He said one of the powers of we think of that one of the powers of mindfulness is sustained focus, but actually the true power is in the sustained awareness. And there's so much truth to that, because it's, we can only redirect our attention to the level that we are aware that our attention has drifted, right? And in a world of constant distractions and partial attention, we're constantly being pulled out of the present moment. And we can only get back into the present moment. We can only get back to the task at hand if we are aware that we actually got pulled out of the present moment, right? So I think
True.
That's a very, very subtle but powerful aspect of a mindfulness practice.
Yeah, that is very true. So I would love it if you would describe for our audience what personal leadership means to you.
What personal leadership means to me. First thing starts with purpose. I think, everybody's talking about this today, but I think it's the reason everybody's talking about it today, because it's so important. But I think really figuring out what your purpose is, what your why is, and then being able to connect that to all areas of your life. I think that's a big part of it. Purpose, because I think purpose drives the second thing, and the second thing's vision, right? We have to, if we want to have vision, we have to understand what is the purpose within the vision, right? And those two things are definitely connected. I think those are two of the biggest things from a personal leadership standpoint. Just understanding purpose and vision, and from understanding purpose and vision, we can reverse engineer all the processes that we need in order to bring those to life. And that might sound oversimplified, but I think from a personal leadership perspective, those things are huge. The other thing is also really developing your emotional intelligence, your self-awareness, your ability to self-manage, meaning like manage your mental and emotional state. Other two components are your relationship awareness, whether that is your awareness of the dynamic between you and the person that you're relating to, and then relationship management, being able to manage that relationship. So the self-awareness, self-management, relationship awareness, and relationship management are really big from a leadership perspective, whether that's how you're showing up in your business as a husband, a father, a wife, spouse, whatever you want, a coach. Being able to do those four things are going to take you a long, long, long way.
Yeah, I love that. So how are you doing today in terms of managing that level of anxiety and depression that you once felt? With the tools that you're using today, where are you in terms of effectively managing that aspect of your life?
That's a great question. Better than before, but not as good as I want to be. I think, how do I answer that question? I mean, I think it maybe be more helpful to share kind of some things that I've done to manage that. I mean, I think I'm a person who was always, probably like you've always going to be thinking there's more to do, another level to get to, whatever it is. I mean, but I think one of the biggest things that has helped move the needle on that is really just accepting the fact that it's okay to not be okay some days. Like, I think the Buddha talks about this. He calls it the second arrow. And it's not the thing that actually happens. It is the judgment, the self-criticism, the whatever you want to call it, that comes after the event that happens. And so I think really being aware of that as well, and finding self-forgiveness, self-compassion, self-care, being able to know when to say no, being able to say, you know what, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday and I'm exhausted, so I'm going for a hike, or I'm going to the beach, or I'm going to a yoga class, right? And being able to know yourself well enough to know what is best for you, regardless of what the world says you should be doing.
Wow. I really appreciate you being so thoughtful in your response and thinking about this, because this topic, the ability to accept the fact that it's okay to not be okay, that's a very powerful point, because we are bombarded with images of of an ideal, right? Images of an ideal situation, whether it's a successful business, whether it's successful marriage, business relationships, whatever that happens to be, there are ideals. And we think that that is perhaps the way that other people are living, and yet I'm not able to reach that same level. And why? And then we have that tendency to beat ourselves up or tell ourselves these stories that just aren't true. And to acknowledge and recognize the fact that I'm okay, right? I still have work to do, and I recognize that, but I'm willing to put the work in to continue to grow, to continue to learn, to continue to become better at managing my emotions and my anxiety, and work on self-care and all those things. They're so incredibly important. And when I asked you the question about self-leadership, this is a big part of that as I see it in working with leaders. Because I really believe that, Mike, that the the most effective leaders, the best leaders that I've been fortunate enough to learn from, to be around, to work with, they're incredibly good at leading themselves, meaning that in addition to the things that you mentioned, they are also very effective at managing their own self-care, taking care of their mental well-being, their physical well-being, their relationships, spirituality, all of those things that make us who we are, right? Because they know that in order for them to be effective, to be disciplined, to be able to show up and serve others at the highest level, that it starts with them, right? They bring themselves, we all bring ourselves to everything that we do. And if we don't have ourselves right, how can we expect to be the best for someone else, to be the best for a spouse, for a friend, for a business leader? It starts with us.
Yeah, no question about it. I think a lot of people overlook it and go straight to leading other people, but leading yourself is above and beyond the hardest thing to do. It's easy for me to be objective and to coach somebody and give them advice on things that they should be doing, but am I actually doing those things myself? Am I actually, taking my own advice? Am I leading myself in a way that I want others to lead themselves? It's right. Sounds simple, but it's incredibly difficult to do. It's the hardest thing to do in leadership.
That is so true. So, Mike, you have a new book coming out called The New Rules for the Future of Leadership. What I would love for us to do, if you could share with us, I know that there are 4 really big key areas to the book. And so just talk us through very briefly, what was the genesis for writing this book? Why did you feel that now was the time that this book needed to be written, that you were the voice to bring this book to life, and who is it for?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one of the biggest things is that in March of 2020, the world changed. In June of 2020, the world changed, right? And expectations of leaders, expectations of companies, changed overnight. People are no longer willing to trade a paycheck or trade purpose for a paycheck. People want their employers to be a force for good for the world and for them, especially with the millennial and Gen Z generations. Right? They have too much awareness. They want their lives to be driven by meaning and purpose, and they want a place of work where they can find belonging and find connection. A lot of these core human needs are being demanded by employees, because the reality of it is you have to give people a reason to come work for you beyond a paycheck, from the standpoint that today's world, there's just too many other opportunities. If I'm just going to go work for $50, $60, $70, $80,000 a year, and I'm just going for the paycheck, you know what? I can figure out how to run an Amazon store, or how to create content, or how to run an affiliate program in order to make that type of money, right? Like, you have to, but that's where the opportunity lies, is the organizations that are aware of this, that can create a workplace where they're using their business as a vehicle for social impact, for connection, for purpose, for well-being, for belonging, are going to set themselves up to win big time in the long run, right? And I think in 2019, the CEO Roundtable voted on what the top priorities are for that should exist as a business, and shareholder profits for the first time ever were no longer the priority, right? And there were other things along the lines of purpose and sustainability. And I think that's, at the end of the day, like, every business was created to solve a problem, right? And if it doesn't solve a problem, it doesn't exist. And I think, business businesses and leaders have yes, they need to make money. Yes, they need to be able to drive revenue, of course, all those things, right? But they also are in a position where they have a responsibility and a capability to do more, to use their businesses for some of these things that I mentioned. And I think we're at a time and place where people are ready for that change. And it's going to require a mindset shift from leadership, right? A business's products and services are a direct reflection of the mindsets that the leaders hold. And I think again, to your point about personal leadership, right? It starts with the leaders internally and what their beliefs and values are, and then how that reflects on the businesses.
So what is the biggest overall lesson that you've learned since starting MindShift Labs? The biggest overall lesson that you've learned that you could share with all of us?
I have so many. We could do a whole show on the lessons that I've learned.
I'm sure.
I think the biggest one has been that there's just so much that I don't control. I think we're brought up in a culture where there's somewhat of an illusion of control. I mean, there's been so many things that have happened, and this is beyond starting MindShift Labs, but like my whole life, where you do all the right things, you follow the exact strategy, you run the right copy on the ads, you do everything to a T, everything by the playbook, and things just don't work out. And I think one of the biggest things that's helped me with that, grasp that, because that's an athlete mindset, that's an entrepreneur mindset, that I control my destiny, right? And I think there is truth to that, right? There is some truth to that, but the other truth that is juxtaposed with that is that there's a lot of stuff that I do not control. Right? I mean, March 2020 is a great example, right? I could share a lot of stories about what happened March 2020 in my life. But, I think that's one of the things. And I think also just along with this illusion of control, it's really adopting this belief that I know nothing. And it really comes from a place of non-judgment, right? I think that X happens and it's going to correlate with this and it's going to be good for me. Or I think something bad happens and it's going to have a detrimental effect, and actually the complete opposite happens. It was the best thing that happened for me. Just approaching business and life from a place of this detached place. And that doesn't mean I'm complacent, but it just means that I'm letting go of what I think is best for me, so that I can let what is best for me unfold. I don't know about you, Jay, but in my life, the greatest relationships, experiences, accomplishments that I've ever had are things that I had never planned or imagined. And, it's like when you look at it from that perspective, it just helps you kind of step out of your own ego with things and allows you to be more in the flow of life and flow of business versus, when we're in this place of resistance to these things that show up, we block flow. And when we block flow, we block all the good things that are waiting for us on the other side.
So true. So true and so well said. As you were sharing that the biggest overall lesson around control, it made me think about basketball as an example, and the fact that the basketball team does not have control over the scoreboard. They don't.
Yeah.
Some people may think they do, but they really don't. But what do they have control over? They have control over their own effort, the training that they put in, running the drills over and over again, being highly disciplined, and doing the work. Those are the things that they, and obviously taking care of themselves, diet, all of those other areas. But those are the things that they can control. The scoreboard, if they do all of those things, the scoreboard is going to take care of itself.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you go to a basketball game at any level, well, maybe not any level, but most levels of basketball, right? The coaches aren't yelling at their kids for not making shots. They're not, do you know what I'm saying? So like, it's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it's the preparation. It's all the things that you can control, not the outcomes. No question about it. I think it's the same in business.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And there are plenty of people who would push back on that and say, no, I can control that. And I would argue that point. You can influence certain things, but do you really have control? Do you have control over whether someone's going to say yes or no to you, to your proposal, right? To your sale, to your contract, all of those things, right? You can do all things well. You can present all of the reasons why you are the best solution to solve their problem, but you do not control whether that person's going to say yes or no to you. So as we are wrapping up our conversation, a couple more questions for you. If you could ask one question of anyone that is either alive or no longer living, who would it be, and what would be the one question that you would ask?
Man, that is such a tough question. I would ask Buddha or Jesus how to be in a place of complete non-detachment. Complete detachment and non-judgment.
That's a good one. So here's my final question to you. What is the most valuable, unexpected lesson that you've learned from one of your clients? The most valuable, unexpected lesson that you've learned from one of your clients?
Well, I'll bring it back to one of the first things that you asked me about with getting off the medication. And you asked, was it just the sunlight, or were there other things that you were dealing with? And I brought it back to tying my identity, or tying my self-worth to my identity. And so in 2011, Steph Curry flew me out to Charlotte to be the assistant director for the first skills academy that he was running for some of the top high school and college basketball players in the country. And at this academy, I got to know him a little bit and stayed in touch more when he would come to Milwaukee or to LA for pregame workouts, because I would always go watch the NBA coaches work out their guys before the games, because in the NBA, they don't practice a lot during the season. So a lot of their skill work and the guys getting up shots and the guys who aren't getting minutes are getting their work in on the court before the games. So I'd go watch pregame workouts several times a year just to learn. The NBA coaches are some of the best in the world at individual player development. So one year I was working with a seventh grader named Jordan at our basketball training facility. He was working with our basketball company. And Golden State was coming to Milwaukee, and I texted Steph and asked him for 2 tickets to the game. There was one for me and one for this kid named Jordan. And I just knew this was going to be an unbelievable experience for Jordan at such a young and impressionable age to get a firsthand look, a behind-the-scenes look at what the best of the best do to prepare for their games, right? So it was January, I think 2013. It's freezing cold outside. I met Jordan at the Bradley Center where the Bucks used to play in the parking lot. And we walked in through the players' security entrance, walked through the tunnel where the players and the refs run out for warm-ups, and we had a seat on one of the courtside seats that would become the team bench for the game. And Steph saw us. He came over and he said hi, and he took a seat next to Jordan. And I overheard the conversation that he was having with this 7th grade kid. You see Jordan, he's just in awe of being in the presence of Steph. I mean, you think of being 13 years old and you could have met that artist or athlete or celebrity whose poster you had cut out from the magazine that was hanging up in your bedroom wall, right? He was just in awe. And Steph was asking Jordan all these questions. And he was asking Jordan about everything outside of basketball. He asked Jordan about his friends. He asked Jordan about school. He asked Jordan about other interests, extracurricular interests outside of basketball. And what I realized from this conversation was that Steph was trying to get Jordan to understand that as much as they both love basketball, as much as they both put a ton of work in and were passionate about the game, that there were other things in life that were bigger than basketball. And this was in 2013, and I think in 2013 playoffs, 2013-2014 playoffs, Steph was when Steph blew up in the playoffs. And as I was kind of observing him from a distance, I drew a connection, and I realized that yes, has he put in a ton of intentional, effective, deliberate work on the court and has an unbelievable skill level? Yes, no question about it. But it's also tied to the beliefs that he holds. And there's a reason that Steph plays with so much joy, gratitude, freedom, and creativity on the basketball court. And that's because when he walks off the court, whether he goes 1 for 10 from the three-point line or 9 for 10 from the three-point line, he still feels the same way about himself because he doesn't place his identity, he doesn't wrap his identity up into his performance. When he steps out on the court, he knows that he has an identity in his faith, in being a husband, a father, an activist, an entrepreneur, right? And so that takes some of the pressure off of us when we can place our identity in things beyond our work. And this belief that he holds that I'm more than a jersey, I'm more than an athlete, ironically is what allows him to play with all that joy, gratitude, freedom, and creativity. And where do joy, gratitude, freedom, and creativity exist? They exist in the present moment. Where does flow exist? It exists in the present moment. So there's this belief that he has that I'm more than an athlete, I'm more than a jersey, allows him to drop into the present moment, let go of all the external, which is the only place that we can do our greatest work and that we can show up for the people that we love and that we lead. And that would be the unexpected lesson that I learned from one of the guys that I've been able to be around.
I love that. That is so powerful. What a great way to tie a bow around this conversation. So, Mike, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. Thank you for bringing your humanity, for being so candid and authentic in the conversation and sharing your story, your insights, and your wisdom with all of us. I truly appreciate it, and I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on and the great conversation.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I do have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps our podcast grow and continue to attract amazing guests just like Mike. So to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.